Welcome and thanks for joining me on Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. By the time world leaders returned from Scotland earlier this month, negotiators were already working around the clock to turn grand promises into action. What's Asia's role in fulfilling the global mission to tackle climate change? Meanwhile, how does Chief Executive Carrie Lam's policy address answer the call for a greener future? And at what cost? Tony Verb, co-founder of Carbonless Asia, joins us now. He was in Glasgow for the United Nations Climate Conference. Tony, welcome to Talk the Walk. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Sarah.
You bet. Now, first of all, what's your biggest takeaway from the COP26 summit in Glasgow?
Well, there are a couple of people that expected more to come out of COP26, but I'm an optimist. And with Carbonless, we decided to play an optimist's role in the global climate change discourse. We come into the conversation from the mindset of abundance. We believe there is enough capital. We believe the technology is there to actually combat climate change. And those are exactly the kind of technologies we would like to work with, help them scale across Asia Pacific. And indeed, COP26 has been very important for Asia and Asia Pacific, despite there were quite few representatives from the region for COVID-19 reasons. But India, Thailand, and Vietnam have all came out with their carbon neutral and net zero commitments this last week, which is a very big turning point and a very big milestone for the region.
Now you talk about the role of the Asia-Pacific region. I'm just about to ask, because I read that President Xi Jinping was not there, but there is a Chinese delegation in Glasgow led by negotiator Xie Zhenhua. Now, he said China didn't object to the goal of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and blamed the United States for withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. Is Asia a strong player at the climate negotiating table?
I think Asia's hand is going to get stronger and has to become stronger. Asia's role has to become stronger because around 50%, and according to certain estimates, more than 50% of the world's carbon footprint is being generated in Asia Pacific, and that proportion is expected to rise. So with China, Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong, four markets that committed to their carbon neutral net zero targets last year represent more than a third of the world's CO2 emissions. Now, before last year, there were no such commitments, and obviously around the negotiation tables and these discourses, the hand and the role was consequently not as strong, but it has to become stronger now. And I believe that is going to be the case in the near future. And we are very excited to be witnessing it and contributing it in our very humble way.
When delegating responsibility towards global warming, I often heard this argument that if you take a look at a longer time span, like historically speaking, the Western countries, spearheaded by the United States, they accumulated those greenhouse gas emissions throughout a very long period of time. So when it came to this, delegation of liability and responsibility, who should be paying more, who should be contributing more to tackling climate change, how do countries come to agreement about that?
Sarah, one of the reasons why I'm excited to be involved in the climate change community on discourse or work or fight against climate change, once again, in our very humble ways, is that this is the only topic these days that the world can really come around and join forces for to work on together. I personally don't like to look at or even prefer to ignore the blaming and shaming, and I'm encouraging everyone, and I believe this is the overwhelming feeling and sentiment within the community. I'm encouraging everyone to come together and work together on battling climate change. and everyone should contribute in their very own way. Now, the biggest question mark is less between who should take responsibility for the past and whether it's the East or the West, Asia or the US. It's more about the emerging developing countries and the rich developed countries. That is indeed a big question mark and a difficult one to tackle because developing countries would have to, by old standards and development models, should emit more CO2 before they get to a certain development level. And by restricting them and making, expecting commitments from them not to do that, implicitly, their development is being curtailed.
All right, apart from governments and, for example, individuals, what are the other players in this global climate governance, so to speak, who can play their part in achieving decarbonization?
It is indeed the emitters, because if we think about and if we talk about countries or markets, we always talk about an aggregate of big industrial players, carbon footprint and carbon emissions. And if we consider the main sectors and verticals, they happen to be energy, the built environment, and transportation and mobility. They collectively account to, according to certain estimates, there are various figures, but to more than 70% of the world's carbon footprint. Now, these are exactly the verticals that we are focusing at Carbonless. And actually, we are doing that in an urban context because cities are responsible for more than 70% of the world's CO2 emissions. So cities, energy, infrastructure, built environment, property, and mobility are the main sectors, and the players, property developers, transport operators, utility companies are indeed the ones that need to contribute to the decarbonization efforts. And I'm very glad for that reason to share with you that in Hong Kong, we are working with MTR on a global decarbonization technology challenge at the moment. And obviously MTR in an urban context, in an Asian context, in a Hong Kong context, being the largest transport operator in Hong Kong and one of the significant property developers, is taking a serious step towards decarbonizing its operations. Actually, 85% of the technology that is needed to actually achieve our net zero goals and targets globally are already in existence, and another 10% is already in development. So all we need is scale. All we need is big industrial players to actually commit and take action and invest into technologies and upgrade. And we help them find those technologies, and hopefully we can invest in those together for more scale.
Well, very quick, you mentioned innovation and new technology. I heard something that apart from urging countries to reduce their carbon emissions, there's something called carbon capture to directly retrieve the amount of carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the technology is often referred to as direct air capture, and I think that's what you think about when one discusses taking CO2 directly out of the air. And that's one of the technologies that are already in existence that can actually do that work. The only problem right now is the low scale and the business models around it, because it's very expensive to take that CO2 out of the air. For that reason, big multinational companies that committed themselves to decarbonization and fight against climate change and are described as technology companies have set up venture capital and venture philanthropy funds worth billions of dollars in investing exactly in these kind of technologies. One day, we believe that these technologies will be commercially viable. Now they are technologically viable, and with more scale and with change in carbon pricing, and maybe after the introduction of a carbon tax, these opportunities will be easier to exploit for those companies that already operate around the world.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, Tony, I want to ask you this one last question. How much time, in your opinion, do you envision that Asia can eventually achieve carbonless?
How much time before a carbonless Asia? That's indeed the $1 trillion question, and I'm not even joking, Sarah. The estimation for carbon or climate change related investments by 2035 is beyond $40 trillion around the world, but much of that has to actually be deployed in Asia. Now we claim, and we come into this discourse, as I said, with an abundant mindset. The capital is actually out there. We don't need to create these trillions of US dollars. We just need to channel these trillions of US dollars into carbon conscious technologies and solutions. And those carbon conscious technologies and solutions will be the best investment opportunities, in our opinion, of this coming decade. And that's exactly what we are here to exploit. Now, to answer the question that you asked, I have no answer to that, but everyone needs to do their best, and the private sector needs to realize, and many people out there already realize it or are realizing it and taking steps to exploit this opportunity. They are recognized this is one of the greatest opportunities of this decade, and they need to be part of that.
I see. Thank you very much, Tony, for your time today, and all the best for you in Glasgow. Talk to Wong. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.
Thank you.